The silence over Kandahar province stretched like a death shroud. 300 meters below the circling Predator drone, 8 Navy SEALs pressed themselves against the crumbling adobe walls of a compound that had become their tomb. The Taliban had them surrounded, outnumbered 6-1, with heavy machine guns positioned on every rooftop within 1,000 yards. What should have been a routine extraction had devolved into a nightmare that would haunt military planners for decades. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Vega checked his watch through the dust-caked lens of his night vision goggles. 14 minutes until the medical evacuation helicopter would be forced to abort due to fuel constraints. His radioman, Petty Officer Rodriguez, had taken shrapnel to the chest and was bleeding out despite the combat medic's best efforts. The team's sniper, Chief Petty Officer Williams, had counted at least 40 enemy combatants in the maze of buildings surrounding their position. Every window seemed to conceal the muzzle flash of an AK-47. "Overlord, this is Razor 1 Actual," Vega whispered into his headset, static crackling through the encrypted channel. "We need immediate close air support. Danger close. Grid coordinates follow." His voice carried the controlled desperation of a man who had calculated the mathematics of survival and found the equation lacking. The response came back like a punch to the gut. No fixed-wing assets available for another 47 minutes. By then, Rodriguez would be dead, and the rest of them would likely follow. But wars are won by the unexpected. Sometimes salvation arrives not in the form anticipated, but in the thunder of a General Electric GAU-8 Avenger cannon and the distinctive silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II against the Afghan sky. The pilot's call sign was Vixen 27, and her real name was Captain Lyra Blackwood. She had been orbiting 30 miles south, conducting what the brass euphemistically called armed reconnaissance, essentially flying patterns over empty desert while male pilots handled the real combat missions closer to the action. When Rodriguez's desperate plea for help crackled through the emergency frequency, Blackwood didn't wait for authorization. She banked hard left, pushing her warthog toward the coordinates that would either save 8 American lives or end her military career. The A-10's twin engines screamed as she dove toward an enemy-controlled valley that had already claimed 6 aircraft in the past 2 years. What happened next would transform the legend of close air support forever, though it would take years before anyone in the Pentagon would acknowledge that their miracle had come wrapped in the steady hands of a pilot they'd consistently overlooked. The morning had begun like countless others for Captain Lyra Blackwood, with the bitter taste of lukewarm coffee and the familiar weight of skepticism from her squadron mates. At Bagram Airfield, the pre-flight briefing had been standard fare, reconnaissance sweeps over sectors deemed low priority by mission planners who seemed to believe that putting a woman in an A-10 was more political statement than tactical asset. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, had assigned her the southeastern patrol route with all the enthusiasm of someone delegating paperwork. "Just keep your eyes open out there, Vixen," Hayes had said, not bothering to look up from his mission folder. "Intel suggests minimal activity in your sector." The dismissal in his voice was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of professional slight that had followed Blackwood through 8 years of military service. She'd learned to absorb these moments without reaction, filing them away in the mental compartment where she stored every instance of being underestimated. Blackwood had earned her wings at the top of her class, mastering the A-10's complex systems with a precision that bordered on artistry. The Thunderbolt II was not a forgiving aircraft. It demanded respect, intuition, and split-second decision-making under conditions that would break lesser pilots. Its massive GAU-8 cannon could fire 3,900 rounds per minute of depleted uranium shells, each weighing nearly a pound. The aircraft itself was built around that gun, an airborne tank killer designed to survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. But for all her technical proficiency, Blackwood remained an outsider in a brotherhood that measured worth in combat sorties and confirmed kills. Her 3 years of flawless flight operations, Her encyclopedic knowledge of close air support protocols, her ability to thread a Maverick missile through a window at 4 miles. None of it seemed to matter when squadron assignments were distributed. She flew the quiet sectors while others claimed the headlines. This morning's route would take her over the Spin Boldak region, a stretch of desert and scattered compounds where Taliban activity had been reportedly minimal. Her A-10 carried a full combat load, 1,174 rounds for the GAU-8, 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and a pair of 500-pound joint direct attack munitions. Enough firepower to level a city block, wasted on what amounted to an airborne patrol shift over empty sand. As she climbed through 8,000 feet, Blackwood ran through her mental checklist with mechanical precision. Fuel flow, hydraulics, weapons systems, communication arrays. Every gauge and indicator confirmed that her aircraft was ready for war, even if war wasn't expected to find her. The irony wasn't lost on her that she flew one of the most lethal machines ever constructed, yet spent most of her time orbiting over landscapes devoid of targets. The radio chatter from other flights filtered through her headset, pilots coordinating strikes and requesting battle damage assessments from sectors classified as high priority. Blackwood listened with the practiced ear of someone perpetually on the periphery, absorbing tactical situations she wasn't invited to join. Her sector remained silent, a canvas of brown earth and scattered villages that seemed frozen in time beneath the Afghan sun. 23 minutes into her patrol, everything changed. The emergency frequency exploded with desperate voices and coordinates that placed American lives in immediate jeopardy. As Rodriguez's blood-tinged plea for salvation reached her ears, Captain Lyra Blackwood faced the defining moment of her military career and chose to fly toward the sound of guns rather than wait for permission to save lives. The coordinates Rodriguez transmitted placed the surrounded SEALs in a valley that military cartographers had nicknamed the Graveyard, a maze of compound walls and narrow alleyways where 6 coalition aircraft had been shot down in the past 18 months. Taliban fighters had learned to use the terrain's natural advantages, positioning heavy weapons on rooftops and in reinforced positions that could engage aircraft from multiple angles simultaneously. It was exactly the kind of environment where an A-10's low-altitude capabilities could prove decisive or fatal. Blackwood banked her Thunderbolt toward the coordinates, pushing the throttles forward as she began a rapid descent. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines responded with their characteristic whine, propelling the heavily armored aircraft toward a battle that had already been raging for 17 minutes. Through her heads-up display, she could see the target area materializing in the distance, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by agricultural fields that provided perfect cover for enemy fighters. Any station, this is Vixen 27, she transmitted on the emergency frequency. I am 5 minutes out from your position. Stand by for close air support. The response came back immediately, Vega's voice cutting through static with barely controlled relief. Vixen 27, Razor 1 actual. We are danger close to multiple enemy positions. I say again, danger close. We have wounded that need immediate medical evacuation. The tactical situation crystallized in Blackwood's mind as she processed the information. Danger close meant the enemy was within 600 meters of friendly forces, close enough that any weapon system more powerful than small arms fire risked killing the very people she was trying to save. As she approached the target area, Blackwood could see muzzle flashes winking from numerous buildings like deadly fireflies. The SEALs were pinned down in a compound at the center of the complex, surrounded by Taliban fighters who had positioned themselves with tactical precision. Every rooftop seemed to bristle with weapons, and the narrow alleyways between buildings created perfect ambush positions for rocket-propelled grenades. Her A-10's targeting pod painted a comprehensive picture of the battlefield below. Thermal imagery revealed at least 40 enemy combatants spread across a dozen buildings, while the SEALs' heat signatures clustered in a defensive position that was rapidly being overrun. The enemy had established interlocking fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt nearly impossible. Unless someone could neutralize the machine gun nests systematically, without endangering the Americans trapped in the center of the kill zone. Blackwood had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times in simulators and training exercises, but academic preparation couldn't replicate the weight of knowing that 8 lives hung in the balance of her next decisions. The A-10's weapons systems hummed with readiness as she began her attack run, targeting solutions appearing on her display like a deadly constellation. What she was about to attempt would require precision that bordered on the supernatural, threading high-explosive rounds through gaps measured in meters, while American forces sheltered mere hundreds of feet away. The first pass would determine whether she was about to become a hero or add her name to the list of pilots who had died trying to save others in this cursed valley. Lieutenant Commander Vega pressed himself against the compound wall as another burst of machine gun fire chewed chunks from the adobe above his head. Rodriguez was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and labored despite the medic's efforts to seal the sucking chest wound. Chief Williams had identified 3 heavy machine gun positions that dominated their only escape routes, while enemy fighters continued to advance through the surrounding alleyways under covering fire. "Sir, we've got movement on the east wall," whispered Petty Officer Jackson, the team's demolitions expert. Through his rifle scope, he could see Taliban fighters preparing to breach their perimeter with explosive charges. The mathematics of their situation had become brutally simple. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of ammunition. Even if the promised medical evacuation helicopter arrived, it would be shot down before it could land in the storm of enemy fire. That's when they heard it, a sound that would haunt enemy fighters across Afghanistan for years to come. The distinctive whine of twin turbofan engines announced the arrival of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, its titanium bathtub cockpit glinting in the harsh desert sun as it dropped below the surrounding ridgeline. The aircraft seemed to materialize from the very air itself, a gray ghost bearing salvation in the form of depleted uranium death. "Razor 1 actual, Vixen 27 is on station," Blackwood's voice crackled through their radio with professional calm that belied the complexity of her tactical situation. "I have eyes on multiple enemy positions. Need you to mark your location with IR strobe and hunker down. This is going to get loud." Vega activated his infrared beacon, a device visible only to aircraft equipped with appropriate sensors. Through her targeting pod, Blackwood could now clearly distinguish between friendly and enemy positions. The SEALs appeared as a tight cluster of heat signatures surrounded by a constellation of Taliban fighters who had no idea that death was about to rain down from above. Her first target was the heavy machine gun position that posed the greatest threat to any rescue attempt. The Taliban fighters had positioned their weapon on a rooftop with clear fields of fire in 3 directions, making it nearly impossible for the SEALs to move without exposing themselves to lethal crossfire. Blackwood lined up her approach angle with mathematical precision, accounting for wind speed, target distance, and the ballistic characteristics of her GAU-8 cannon. The A-10's nose dipped slightly as she acquired the target, her finger hovering over the firing control. Years of training compressed into a single moment of absolute focus as she calculated the precise firing solution that would eliminate the enemy position without endangering American lives. The machine gun nest sat atop a building 47 meters from the SEAL's position, close enough to be lethal to the Americans below if her aim was even slightly off. At precisely 1,847 feet above ground level, Captain Lyra Blackwood squeezed the trigger and introduced the Taliban to the most feared sound in modern warfare. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a sound that defied description. Imagine a chainsaw the size of a Volkswagen Beetle operated by an angry god. The 7-barrel rotary cannon fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 65 per second, each projectile capable of penetrating 18 inches of steel armor. The weapon's recoil was so powerful that it actually slowed the A-10's forward velocity, turning the aircraft into a flying artillery platform of unprecedented lethality. The machine gun nest simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a fortified position manned by 3 Taliban fighters. The next it was a smoking crater filled with pulverized concrete and twisted metal. The depleted uranium rounds had struck with such devastating effect that the building's entire rooftop collapsed, burying the weapon and its operators beneath tons of rubble. But Blackwood wasn't finished. Banking hard left, she immediately acquired her second target, another heavy weapons position that had been pouring automatic fire into the SEAL's compound. This target sat atop a building that shared a wall with a structure containing civilians, requiring even more precise fire control. Her targeting computer calculated the optimal approach angle as she lined up for another strafing run. "Holy shit," whispered Petty Officer Jackson, his voice barely audible over his radio. The devastation wrought by a single burst from the A-10's cannon had silenced half the enemy fire in their immediate area. Taliban fighters throughout the complex began shouting in panic, realizing they were now facing an adversary they had no effective counter for. Some began abandoning their positions, while others tried to relocate their weapons to avoid the airborne predator now circling overhead. Vega felt hope kindle in his chest for the first time since the ambush began. Vixen 2-7, that was a direct hit. Secondary target is the building with the red door, approximately 50 meters north of our position. His voice carried newfound confidence as he watched enemy tracers that had been raking their position suddenly fall silent. Blackwood acknowledged the target designation and began her second attack run. Through her targeting pod, she could see Taliban fighters scrambling like ants from a disturbed nest, their carefully planned ambush disintegrating under the psychological pressure of facing an aircraft specifically designed to kill them. The A-10's titanium armor could withstand direct hits from small arms fire and even some anti-aircraft weapons, making it virtually invulnerable to anything the enemy could deploy against it. Her second burst was even more precise than the first. The GAU-8 round struck the designated building with surgical accuracy, collapsing the structure and eliminating another heavy weapons team without causing damage to adjacent buildings. The psychological effect on remaining enemy fighters was immediate and catastrophic. Their organized ambush was rapidly becoming a rout as Blackwood systematically dismantled their positions with clinical efficiency. Below, the SEALs watched in amazement as their desperate situation transformed into something approaching tactical advantage. The pilots circling overhead had just accomplished in 90 seconds what would have required a full platoon of ground forces and hours of careful maneuvering. Her precision and timing were flawless, each attack perfectly calculated to maximum enemy casualties while minimizing risk to friendly forces. For the first time since Rodriguez had been wounded, Lieutenant Commander Vega allowed himself to believe they might all make it home alive. The transformation of the battlefield was nothing short of miraculous. What had been a carefully coordinated Taliban ambush designed to trap and eliminate an elite American Special Operations team was rapidly degenerating into chaos. Enemy fighters who had been confidently advancing on the SEAL's position were now scrambling for cover, abandoning heavy weapons and sophisticated firing positions in favor of simple survival. Blackwood circled above the compound like a mechanical bird of prey, her targeting systems continuously scanning for threats while her radio crackled with updates from the ground team. Each pass revealed new enemy positions, and each attack run eliminated them with devastating precision. The psychological impact of the A-10's presence was as powerful as its weapons systems. Taliban fighters throughout the area began abandoning their positions rather than face the titanium-armored aircraft that had turned their ambush into a slaughter. "Vixen 2-7, we've got 3 more targets on the western approach," Vega transmitted, his voice now carrying tactical confidence rather than desperate hope. Through his rifle scope, He could see enemy fighters attempting to reposition a recoilless rifle that could potentially threaten both the SEALs and the incoming medical evacuation helicopter. The weapon represented a significant threat that needed immediate elimination. Blackwood acquired the target through her pod and began calculating her approach vector. The enemy position was located on a rooftop adjacent to what appeared to be a mosque, requiring extreme precision to avoid collateral damage that could create an international incident. Her training had emphasized the critical importance of minimizing civilian casualties and respecting religious sites, even in the midst of intense combat operations. Razor 1 Actual, I have eyes on the target. Be advised, it's positioned near a possible religious structure, requesting confirmation on rules of engagement. Blackwood's professionalism shone through her transmission, demonstrating the careful consideration that separated elite military aviators from mere pilots. Every weapon system deployment required not just tactical calculation, but strategic awareness of potential consequences. Vega consulted his map and confirmed that the building in question was indeed a mosque, but also verified that the Taliban fighters were using it as a military position in violation of international law. Vixen 27, target is confirmed military, weapons free. The authorization cleared Blackwood to engage, but she would still need to exercise extraordinary precision to neutralize the threat without damaging the religious structure. Her attack run approached from an angle that would direct any ricocheting rounds away from the mosque, while still providing optimal targeting geometry for the recoilless rifle position. The GAU-8 cannon fired in controlled bursts, each round precisely aimed to destroy the weapon system while preserving the surrounding architecture. The enemy position vanished in a cloud of smoke and debris, but the mosque remained intact, a testament to Blackwood's exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness. By now, the remaining Taliban fighters were in full retreat. The systematic destruction of their heavy weapons positions had eliminated their tactical advantage, while the psychological terror of facing an A-10 had broken their will to continue the engagement. Enemy combatants fled through alleyways and across open ground, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the mechanical death circling overhead. The battlefield that had been a death trap for American forces just minutes earlier was now secure enough for medical evacuation operations. The sound of rotors announced the arrival of the medical evacuation helicopter, a U-60 Black Hawk equipped with advanced life support equipment, and a flight crew trained in combat rescue operations. The pilot had been monitoring Blackwood's frequency, coordinating his approach with her attack runs to ensure he could reach the wounded SEALs safely. The helicopter's door gunners scanned the surrounding buildings through their weapons sights, but the Taliban fighters who remained in the area were focused on escape rather than continued resistance. Dustoff 3-1 is inbound from the north, the helicopter pilot transmitted. Landing zone appears secure thanks to Vixen 27's outstanding work. The praise in his voice reflected the professional admiration of one combat aviator for another, recognizing the exceptional skill required to provide such precise close air support in an urban environment. Blackwood continued circling overhead as the helicopter settled into the compound, her weapons systems ready to engage any enemy forces that might threaten the evacuation. Through her targeting pod, she maintained continuous surveillance of potential sniper positions and escape routes, ensuring that the SEALs could load their wounded teammate without interference. Her presence alone was sufficient to deter any remaining Taliban fighters from attempting to disrupt the rescue operation. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing Rodriguez for transport while the remaining SEALs provided security. Chief Williams established a defensive perimeter around the landing zone, his rifle trained on building windows that might conceal enemy observers. The entire evacuation took less than 4 minutes, but each second was critical to Rodriguez's survival chances. As the helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo, Vega's voice crackled through Blackwood's headset with heartfelt gratitude. Vixen 27, This is Razor One Actual. I don't know how to properly thank you for what you've done here today. You saved 8 American lives with flying that was nothing short of miraculous. The emotion in his transmission was unmistakable, the kind of raw appreciation that can only come from someone who has faced death and been granted reprieve by another's courage and skill. Blackwood's response was characteristically modest. Razor One Actual, just doing my job. Glad I could help bring your boys home. But privately, as she watched the helicopter disappear toward the horizon carrying wounded but living American warriors, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment that transcended any official recognition she might receive. This was why she had become a pilot, why she had endured years of skepticism and professional marginalization. For moments like this when her skills could make the difference between life and death. The return flight to Bagram would give her time to process what had just occurred, but already she could sense that something fundamental had changed. The radio chatter from other flights carried a different tone when her call sign was mentioned, a new note of respect that hadn't existed that morning. Word was already spreading through the tactical air control network about the A-10 pilot who had single-handedly turned a massacre into a rescue operation. But recognition, she knew, would be complicated by the reality of what she had done, flying into combat without authorization, engaging targets without clearance from higher command, risking an international incident to save American lives. The same decision that made her a hero to the SEALs she had saved might make her a problem for the commanders who preferred their combat operations to follow established protocols and chain of command procedures. As Bagram Airfield appeared on the horizon, Captain Lyra Blackwood prepared herself for whatever consequences might follow from her decision to answer a desperate call for help. She had no regrets about her actions, but she was experienced enough to know that heroism and military regulations didn't always align perfectly. The debriefing sessions that awaited her would determine whether her unauthorized rescue mission would be celebrated or censured by the chain of command that had spent 3 years underestimating her capabilities. The landing at Bagram was routine, but Blackwood could sense the change in atmosphere as soon as she shut down her engines. Ground crew personnel who usually offered perfunctory service worked with unusual attention to detail, checking her aircraft systems with the kind of reverence typically reserved for legendary war machines. Word of her morning's work had already reached the flight line through the unofficial network of radio operators and maintenance technicians, who formed the backbone of military aviation operations. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Martinez, approached with an expression that mixed professional pride with genuine amazement. "Ma'am, we're hearing some pretty incredible things about your mission this morning. Is it true you took out 6 enemy positions in a danger-close situation?" His question carried the kind of awe that Blackwood had rarely heard directed toward her accomplishments, a recognition of combat excellence that transcended the usual gender dynamics of military aviation. "The mission was successful, Sergeant," she replied with characteristic understatement. "The A-10 performed exactly as designed. But Martinez had been working on combat aircraft for 12 years, and he could read the story written in expended ammunition, weapons system status indicators, and the subtle stress patterns that appeared in airframe components after intense combat operations. This aircraft had been pushed to its limits by a pilot who knew precisely how to extract maximum performance from every system. The walk to the Squadron Operations Center felt different from her usual post-flight routines. Personnel who had previously offered polite but distant acknowledgments now approached with genuine interest in her welfare and mission results. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. She was being treated not as a female pilot who happened to fly combat missions, but as a combat aviator whose gender had become irrelevant in the face of demonstrated competence under fire. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was waiting in the briefing room with an expression that Blackwood couldn't immediately decode. His usual dismissive demeanor had been replaced by something approaching professional curiosity, though she could sense underlying tension that suggested complications beyond simple mission success. Two other officers flanked him, a colonel she didn't recognize, and a major from the Judge Advocate General's office, whose presence implied that legal questions would be part of her debriefing. "Captain Blackwood," Hayes began, his voice carefully neutral, "we need to discuss your unauthorized departure from assigned patrol sector this morning." The words carried official disapproval, but his tone suggested something more complex than simple disciplinary action. The presence of senior officers indicated that her rescue mission had attracted attention at levels far above squadron command, creating ripple effects that could impact her career in ways both positive and negative. The unknown colonel stepped forward with an extended hand and a smile that seemed genuine. "Captain, I'm Colonel Richardson from 9th Air Force Headquarters. I wanted to personally thank you for extraordinary performance under combat conditions this morning. Your actions saved 8 American lives and demonstrated the kind of tactical innovation that represents the best traditions of military aviation." His praise was official and carefully worded, but carried unmistakable sincerity. The dichotomy was immediately apparent: simultaneous recognition for exceptional performance and potential disciplinary action for violation of established procedures. Blackwood found herself navigating the complex intersection where heroism met military protocol, where saving lives could be both celebrated and questioned, depending on bureaucratic perspectives and regulatory interpretations. The JAG officer opened a legal folder with the mechanical precision of someone accustomed to parsing the fine details of military justice. His presence transformed the debriefing from simple mission analysis into something approaching a formal investigation, complete with potential legal consequences that could define the remainder of Blackwood's military career. The irony was stark. The same decisiveness that had saved American lives now threatened to end the career of the pilot, who had demonstrated such exceptional combat capability. The debriefing lasted 3 hours and covered every aspect of her unauthorized mission in exhaustive detail. Colonel Richardson's questions focused on tactical decision-making and target identification procedures, clearly seeking to understand how she had achieved such precise results in such a challenging environment. His professional admiration was evident despite the formal nature of the proceedings, and Blackwood sensed that he was building a case for commendation rather than court-martial. The JAG Major's inquiries took a different direction, examining the legal framework surrounding her decision to abandon assigned patrol duties and engage in combat operations without explicit authorization. His questions were technically focused but not accusatory, suggesting that senior commanders were more interested in understanding the incident's implications than in pursuing punitive action against a pilot whose performance had been exemplary. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, occasionally providing context about squadron procedures and mission assignments. Blackwood could sense his internal conflict, professional obligation to maintain discipline warring, with recognition that his most underutilized pilot had just demonstrated capabilities that surpassed many of his more favored aviators. The morning's events had shattered his comfortable assumptions about combat effectiveness and pilot assignments. The session concluded with Colonel Richardson's surprising announcement that Blackwood would be temporarily reassigned to direct support of Special Operations Forces, effective immediately. "Captain, your demonstrated ability to provide precise close air support in complex tactical situations makes you invaluable for missions requiring exceptional pilot skill. You'll be working directly with SOCOM elements that specifically request A-10 support for high-risk operations." The reassignment was simultaneously a promotion and a test, recognition of her capabilities combined with assignment to missions that would challenge those abilities on a regular basis. She would be working with elite ground forces who judged aviators solely on combat performance rather than gender or seniority. Success in this role could establish her as one of the premier close air support pilots in the theater, while failure would likely end her combat aviation career permanently. As the briefing concluded, Hayes approached with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal admission. "Captain, I owe you an apology. I've been assigning missions based on assumptions rather than demonstrated capability. This morning proved that I've been wasting one of my best pilots on routine patrols while sending less qualified aviators to handle complex combat situations." His words carried the weight of professional self-recognition, acknowledgement that his biases had nearly prevented exceptional performance from being utilized effectively. Blackwood accepted his apology with the grace of someone who had learned to navigate military politics without losing focus on mission accomplishment. She understood that Hayes's admission represented significant personal growth for a career officer who had operated under traditional assumptions about gender roles in combat aviation. The morning's events had forced him to confront the gap between his expectations and demonstrated reality. That evening, she received an encrypted message informing her that Rodriguez had successfully undergone surgery and was expected to make a full recovery. The medical team credited her rapid response and precise weapons employment with creating the conditions necessary for successful evacuation and treatment. 8 American warriors would return to their families because she had chosen to answer their desperate call for help, regardless of career consequences or administrative complications. The transformation in squadron dynamics became apparent over the following days. Pilots who had previously treated her as a token female presence began seeking her input on tactical problems and close air support procedures. Ground crews requested her specifically for complex maintenance discussions, recognizing that her technical knowledge matched her demonstrated combat skills. Most significantly, mission planners started assigning her to high-priority targets that required exceptional precision and judgment. Her call sign, Vixen 27, began appearing in mission reports with increasing frequency, as special operations forces specifically requested her support for their most challenging assignments. The Taliban had learned to fear the distinctive sound of her A-10's engines, while American ground forces considered her arrival overhead to be synonymous with tactical victory. She had become what every combat pilot aspired to be, a force multiplier whose presence could alter the outcome of engagements through superior skill and unwavering dedication to mission accomplishment. The legend of Captain Lyra Blackwood was being written one mission at a time, in the language of precision weapons employment, and saved American lives. But legends, she had learned, carried their own burdens and expectations. Each successful mission raised the bar for the next one, creating a cycle of escalating challenges that would test not just her flying skills, but her ability to maintain the psychological equilibrium necessary for sustained combat operations. 3 weeks after the rescue that had changed everything, Blackwood found herself preparing for a mission that would dwarf her previous accomplishments in complexity and risk. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist leader was meeting with local Taliban commanders in a compound less than 2 miles from a refugee camp, containing over 3,000 civilians. The target presented an opportunity to eliminate key enemy leadership, but the proximity to non-combatants created rules of engagement that would challenge even the most skilled combat aviator. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility at Bagram, attended by representatives from multiple agencies and military branches. The target compound had been under surveillance for 6 days, with analysts confirming the presence of at least 12 high-value individuals whose elimination would significantly disrupt Taliban operations throughout the region. However, the compound's location in a dense urban area surrounded by civilian structures created targeting challenges that had prevented previous strike attempts. "Captain Blackwood," the intelligence officer began, "you've been specifically requested for this mission because of your demonstrated ability to provide precision strikes in complex environments. The target building is surrounded by civilian structures within a 100-meter radius. Any collateral damage would create a humanitarian crisis, an international incident that could impact our entire Afghanistan strategy." The tactical parameters were clearly defined but seemingly impossible to execute. The target building contained enemy leadership, whose elimination was critical to ongoing operations. But any weapon system powerful enough to penetrate the structure's reinforced construction risked causing catastrophic collateral damage. Traditional air-to-ground missiles were ruled out due to blast radius concerns, while smaller weapons might prove insufficient to neutralize hardened enemy positions. Blackwood studied the reconnaissance imagery with the analytical focus that had made her reputation. The compound's layout revealed architectural features that might allow for precision engagement using carefully selected weapons and attack angles. Her experience with the GAU-8 cannon's penetration characteristics suggested that it might be possible to neutralize the target while minimizing risk to surrounding structures. But the margin for error would be measured in inches rather than meters. "I can do it," she announced after several minutes of silent analysis. "But I'll need complete tactical control of the battle space and clearance to abort if civilian risk becomes unacceptable." Her conditions reflected not arrogance but professional assessment of the requirements necessary to accomplish such a demanding mission. The assembled officers recognized that they were witnessing the confidence that came from proven combat performance under the most challenging conditions. The mission launched at 3:47 hours, with Blackwood's A-10 leading a formation that included electronic warfare aircraft and reconnaissance platforms designed to provide comprehensive battlespace awareness. The target compound appeared on her sensors as a cluster of heat signatures surrounded by the thermal patterns of civilian structures. Every building within 500 meters contained noncombatants, whose safety depended on her ability to thread explosive projectiles through gaps measured in meters. As she approached the target area, Blackwood began the complex mental calculations that would determine mission success or failure. Wind speed, atmospheric density, target building construction, surrounding structure locations, dozens of variables that would influence projectile trajectory and impact effects. Her training had prepared her for this level of precision, but execution would require performance that operated at the very limits of human capability and aircraft systems integration. The first pass was purely reconnaissance, allowing her to confirm target identification and assess real-time conditions that might differ from intelligence estimates. Through her targeting pod, she could see heat signatures moving within the compound that matched the expected pattern for a high-level meeting. Enemy security personnel were positioned on rooftops and in prepared positions, but their focus was on ground-level threats rather than aerial attack. Her attack run began with a shallow dive that would allow maximum precision, while minimizing the time she would be vulnerable to enemy fire. The GAU-8 cannon was loaded with a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds, specifically selected for this mission's unique requirements. Each projectile had been individually inspected and certified for accuracy, while her aircraft's targeting systems had been calibrated to tolerances measured in millimeters rather than the standard centimeters. At precisely 1,200 feet above ground level, Captain Lyra Blackwood began the most demanding weapons engagement of her career, knowing that success would eliminate key enemy leadership, while failure could create an international incident that would haunt American foreign policy for decades. The margin between heroism and catastrophe had never been smaller, and everything depended on her ability to achieve perfection when perfection seemed impossible. The targeting solution crystallized on her heads-up display like a digital prophecy of destruction. Every system indicator showed green as Blackwood aligned her aircraft with mathematical precision. The GAU-8 cannon trained on a target barely larger than a standard shipping container. Through her targeting pod, she could see the heat signatures of enemy personnel moving within the structure, unaware that their deaths were being calculated by computers designed for exactly this purpose. Her finger hovered over the firing control as she made final adjustments to account for crosswind conditions and target building construction details that could affect projectile penetration. The intelligence briefing had indicated reinforced concrete walls capable of stopping standard small arms fire, but vulnerable to the depleted uranium rounds loaded in her cannon. The challenge lay not in penetrating the structure, but in doing so without creating secondary explosions or structural collapse that might damage adjacent buildings. Control, Vixen 27 has acquired target. Beginning attack run. Her transmission was professionally calm despite the enormous pressure of executing a precision strike that would be analyzed by military experts for decades. Success would eliminate a terrorist cell responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region, while failure could end both her career and American operational effectiveness in the area.